We have a word for being unfaithful to your partner: cheating. Today, the ultimate expression of commitment is the wedding, a public vow to last a lifetime, long before the first divorce was ever a possibility. For most of our history, that word would have meant nothing. Imagine a world of 30 people moving across an open savanna 300,000 years ago. You slept within arm's reach of your neighbors, and they slept within arm's reach of you. There were no walls, no private shelters, and nowhere to take a secret. Humans are a biological rarity because we form lasting pair bonds at all. Out of every 100 kinds of mammal on Earth, only 3 or 4 ever pair up this way. We often assume this drive to bond means we were always wired to stay with one person for 50 or 60 years. But just because our ancestors formed deep bonds doesn't necessarily mean those bonds were intended to last a lifetime. If the lifelong vow was absent for 90% of our time on Earth, it suggests our ancient biological default for relationships was built on something much more fluid than the modern marriage. We find clues to this older way of living among the Hadza of Tanzania. They still live by hunting and gathering, moving through a landscape where privacy is rare and survival depends on the group. Anthropologist Frank Marlowe studied the Hadza and found that only about 1 adult in 5 stays with the same partner for their entire life. Most people here raise a child, drift apart, and eventually find someone new. It is often the woman who ends the bond, simply gathering her things and walking to a different fire to make a new home. Because there was no lifelong vow to break, pairing and pairing again was simply how a life took its shape. Even so, winning a partner was a massive investment. A young man had to move in with a woman's family and hunt for them for years, dragging meat back to their camp season after season. If he couldn't provide, he left with nothing. Courtship was an audition paid in successful kills. This pattern of multiple partners is actually the global norm. Anthropologist George Murdoch looked at over 1,000 human societies and found that in 8 out of 10, a man was allowed more than one wife. Usually, these were the most successful hunters, men who could provide for 2 families instead of 1. Loyalty was real and deeply felt, but promising that loyalty for an entire lifetime was a rare exception that most of our ancestors couldn't afford. Our relationship structures were dictated by a single biological problem. Our brains had grown so large that the price was a baby born completely helpless, unable to walk or feed itself for years. No 2 parents could carry that load alone in a world of predators and constant hunger. It took more than a couple to keep one child alive, and out there, nearly half of all children never reached adulthood. Some cultures developed a survival strategy called partible paternity. Among the Bari of Venezuela, it was believed that every man a woman was with before a birth contributed to the baby. This meant 2 men might act as the child's fathers, one bringing fish from the river, the other meat from the forest. This chart shows the result. Bari children with a second father reached age 15 80 times out of 100. For those with only one father, that number dropped to 64. A second father was the difference between a child living or dying. But this flexibility didn't make the camp a peaceful place. When researchers Martin Daly and Margot Wilson looked at what drove people in these groups to kill, one cause appeared more than any other. It was the jealousy that came after a partner strayed. In a camp with no walls, a lingering look or an empty bed was never a secret for long, and it frequently ended in violence. Ancient relationships were a high-stakes collision between the desperate need for shared survival and the constant, lethal threat of human jealousy. There were always exceptions. We still find stories of the rare couple who weathered everything together and shared a single fire into old age. But they were the rare pair the whole group pointed out to the young, the exception that proved the rule. This lack of lifelong monogamy didn't mean a lack of love. When anthropologists searched for evidence of romantic love across 166 different cultures, they found it in 147 of them. Our ancestors felt the same sleepless nights, the same ache, and the same helpless fall for another person that we feel today. These deep biological responses were already very old when humans were first gathered around fires in the Stone Age. The core of the human story isn't a permanent, lifelong contract. It is a long history of fierce, deep bonding driven by the overwhelming need to keep the next generation alive. The modern expectation of one faithful couple for life is a relatively new invention, but the intense love and jealousy you feel today is part of an ancient inheritance, a biological survival kit used by the restless, wandering people